And we're moving on to a panel about energy, positive energy for investments in the region. So if Giles Redpath and Mathios Rigas are based here, perhaps they could come up. Morning or afternoon. Afternoon. Okay, well, we've heard quite a lot about energy all morning. You always hear a lot about energy when you discuss Greece and Cyprus. Mr. Redpath, would you like to begin?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you to The Economist for inviting me. It's very nice to be in such distinguished company. I am founder and CEO of Hive Energy, and there's one thing that terrifies me more than Vladimir Putin, and that's climate change. Whilst Mr. Putin was nuclear saber rattling from his no doubt concrete bunker somewhere a couple of weeks ago, the IPCC issued a report that would have made headlines everywhere in the world if it wasn't for the situation in Ukraine, which is that climate change is looking almost irreversible, and we are simply not reacting to it quickly enough. I think there's a danger in target setting that everyone has in mind that we're headed for 1.5 degrees by the year 2050. The fact is we're not. As things stand at the moment, we're headed for about 5.5 degrees of warming. And at 5.5 degrees of warming, this planet can support about 1 billion people. That's a lot more dangerous than Putin. I started Hive Energy 10 years ago with a mission to do what I could about climate change. We have so far concentrated largely on solar. We've installed just over 2 gigawatts of solar to date. We've invested 1.6 billion in renewable energy. We see it as absolutely important that the transition to renewable energy is seen as a top priority and that it is greatly accelerated. I think there is a huge danger in the current crisis that non-reliance on fossil fuels from Russia is seen as an excuse to pass through plans for more fossil fuel exploration. I think there was even some mention of the resources of the Eastern Mediterranean this morning. I know similar conversations are being had in the US. Forget fossil fuels. You have wind, you have solar, and we have clean gases on their way, and that's where we should be investing. For our part, we're working on 15 gigawatts of renewables projects around the world. I'm off to South Africa tomorrow, where we have the world's largest green ammonia plant in planning. It's a $4.6 billion project to create ammonia that is used obviously in fertilizers around the world. It's also used greatly in Japan at the moment for decarbonizing coal plants, funnily enough. In Greece, we have been investing in solar. We've developed over 500 megawatts of solar here to date, and we want to invest in a lot of other sectors. I think there is huge opportunity in the hydrogen sector in Greece. Hydrogen, for those of you who haven't been studying it, is made by the splitting of H and O, and you do that in a green way using large amounts of green electricity. Greece has an abundance of solar resource, and it has an even greater abundance of wind resource. And for hydrogen, the combination of the two is very important. In fact, you make the cheapest quality hydrogen where you have both resources, not where you have a single resource, because the capital expenditure is largely on the electrolysis, and you need to keep that electrolysis machine running 24 hours a day, which can only be done with a combination of renewables. So we're very keen to work on hydrogen projects. Hydrogen is important because whilst you can decarbonize the electricity grid with renewable resources, you have a lot of what they call hard to decarbonize sectors, which is mobility, which is steel production, cement production, and hydrogen can answer a lot of those things. So for example, we are keen to work with island economies, with Cyprus, with many of the other Greek islands, to look at creating hydrogen locally, using the solar and wind resource, and using that in mobility. Hydrogen buses are now well established. You'll see them in London already. Hydrogen buses can be used in islands, and there is a huge opportunity to decarbonize ferries using hydrogen. I think Greece has something like 2,000 very short distance ferries, and they can run on hydrogen today. So there are big opportunities there. We're very keen to work in all of these sectors. Across our business, we've been investing also in a number of other technologies. We, in the UK, have secured a large amount of fly ash deposits, which is used in the cement industry to decarbonize that. And we've developed technology for drying the fly ash to make it, to dry it in a green way, to make it usable quickly and economically in the cement industry. And we're keen to look at this opportunity within the lignite areas in northern Greece. In South Africa, we have a technology where we take invasive wood species, and through pyrolysis we turn them into biochar. And biochar is a wonder ingredient for recarbonizing our soils. One of the reasons there's so much fertilizer needed in the world is that our soils have become much poorer with all our intensive agriculture, and we need to put carbon back into the soils. And at the same time, that's a very good way of putting carbon back on the planet. So there are lots of, as we say, circular economy ways where you can use the excess carbon that's in our trees, managing forests, which is obviously something that needs to happen a lot more in Greece to avoid wildfires, and take that carbon and re-put it back into soils where it can be used for agriculture. There are also opportunities just in replanting, and I think particularly in certain areas of Greece and in Cyprus, there's a lot of opportunity for replanting, and there are great subsidies around the world for that now, and the value of carbon is becoming more recognised over time. I believe Greece is a great place to invest. I think it has a lot of the natural resources that the world is going to need, and there certainly seems to be the financial will and muscle to do it. So my only parting comment would be, to those that are in charge of the administration in the room, make the procedures faster. We need to cut the red tape. We need to make good things happen quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. Mathios Rigas from Energean.
Well, what a great way to get introduced. Stop fossil fuels. So the devil has arrived. The devil that produces oil and gas in the Mediterranean. I think the discussion is a little bit more complex than what we just heard here. And of course, we all want to live in a better future. We all want a cleaner planet. We all want our children to live in a better world. Nobody questions that. But there's a reality check. And there's a reality which says that today we did exactly the same mistakes that were just outlined. And as countries, and we operate oil and gas facilities in Greece and Italy, Israel and Egypt, and I'll talk about the distinction. We haven't paid attention to the fact that fossil fuels still today are required. Maybe they will not be required in the next decade or decades to come, but we need them today. So the question that countries need to answer is, we're burning them, so what do we want to do? Produce them or import them? Because that's what's happening right now. Nobody is stopping the use of fossil fuels. And of course, we hear a lot about ideas of renewables and where we need to go, and green hydrogen, and how much does that cost. So who will pay for all this? Who's going to pay for all this? Is anybody willing to accept 50% or whatever the percentage increase in electricity bills of the average consumer? Are we willing to take this? Question number one. Question number two. I drive an electric car in London. And when I bought it, people were saying, but you produce oil and gas. Why do you promote electric cars? That's not the point. If we want to make a real change to this world, we shouldn't make it just in London, Athens, Cyprus, New York, and Paris, because we forget that there are 8 billion people out there that don't have the ability to be in this very nice environment, air conditioning, nice lights, and be able to travel the way we travel. So the transition to this great future has to be just, has to be fair. We should not just be thinking about our little microcosm and thinking that we've saved the world because we use just paper straws when we go out to have a very expensive drink in the bars of London. That's not going to happen. And I was in a conference where we were talking with ministers from Africa and the Far East. And they were talking about the results of COP26. Why did it fail? And it was a failure, right? Why did it fail? Because the people in this part of the world, the developed part of the world, do not understand that this is not just about how we live, it's about how the whole planet lives. So who's prepared to change the way that we all live? Because if we don't do it, nothing's going to change. Now, let's talk about what's happening in the East Mediterranean. And we happen to be the only producer of hydrocarbons in Greece. We produce in a field called Prinos that has been supported in the past by EBRD when there was no funding from other sources, and very recently from the government, to keep the asset alive, not just for the production, because the Prinos field is relatively small and it's not going to make a big difference to the economy, but to convert it into the first carbon storage project in the country. Because this is not just about the production of electricity from renewables, it is about the cement factories we have in Greece, the refineries, the steel mills, the steel factories, the aluminum factories, and the other big industries that cannot live on renewables. So we, the industry, have the technology, have the capital, the management skills, the access to capital to provide solutions also for the industry, which we shouldn't forget. So this is not just about electric cars and reduction of CO2 emissions, which of course is very important. And as a company, I can tell you that Energean was the first E&P company in the world that committed to a net zero strategy. December of 2019, when nobody was focusing on this, we committed to be a net zero emitter, and we are reducing. We are actually taking action. We are reducing our carbon intensity. We are taking action to get to the net zero target. With the help of the Greek government and the European Union, with the RRF, we believe that the CCS project in Greece is going to be a fantastic project that will provide actual solution of storing 6 million tons a year of CO2 where it came from, without impacting the second part, the second word of ESG. Because ESG is not only about environment, it's also about the social impact. It's about the jobs. It is about bringing prosperity to the communities that we work. So Greece, at the moment, and there's been a lot of public discussion and disclosures that is thinking about restarting the exploration and potential production from various sites. This is not an excuse. This is not an excuse because of the war. This is a real need to be energy non-dependent. Because when we're talking about security of energy supply, and when we're talking about depending on someone, whoever that someone is, I think discussion about how much it costs and whether it's viable, feasible, etc., comes to a much lesser level. So, do we want to produce our own resources or we want to import them? That's a key question that governments need to answer. Israel, I'll focus on Israel for a moment because we're investing $2 billion in Israel at the moment. 10 years ago, used to rely on imported gas from Egypt and coal. The Israeli government took a decision and said, we want to go to a green future, but first we want to secure our energy supply. So they promoted exploration of gas. Gas was discovered, developed. We came in 2017, we brought competition. Gas prices in Israel, despite the war, despite what's happening in Europe at the moment, are at $4.2 an MMBTU. Does anybody know what this compares to with the European gas prices we're seeing today?
150.
Thank you, Minister. And more. And that is what hurts at the moment the economies in Europe. And because Israel focused on that, not only it became energy independent, but now it is exporting gas to Egypt. Meaning that geopolitically, it plays a role where others are relying on Israel and its gas resource. The other extreme, and I'm sorry for my Cypriot friends, but gas has been discovered in Cyprus since 2011. And what has happened since then? Nothing. And people are talking about exporting the gas to Egypt, liquefying it, putting it on a ship, bringing it back to Cyprus, regasifying it to use it on the island. Now, if countries want to become energy independent and get to the future that Gilles very correctly said that we need to go to, and I'm a full supporter that we need to go to the green future, we have to decide if we want to be energy independent. And if we do, whether we like it or not, that's the reality check that I mentioned at the beginning, we have to focus on exploiting our natural resources in the region. I'm not talking about Greece only, I'm talking about Greece, Italy, Cyprus, and countries that are also stable and are run by democratic governments. Because we all saw very recently the response to the discussions of mediation for the Ukrainian crisis by our Turkish friends. Israeli president visits Turkey. The first word that Erdogan said when they left this meeting is that we talked about cooperation in the energy sector. What does that mean? Pipeline to Turkey. That's what it means. What other cooperation in energy could happen? So the question that we in Europe need to answer is, who do we want to depend on? So today we're depending on Russia. And the reality is that no government can afford to switch off the lights of people. Imagine the young generation if you tell them you're going to live without Instagram for 24 hours. Because you can't... that's when reality check starts to kick in. So just to close these remarks and have a healthy debate, security of energy supply is extremely important in my view. Responsible operators that look after the environment and have net zero strategies is extremely important as well. Exploitation of our resources until we can get to a future of energy which is affordable, sustainable, and continuously available. Because without these three vectors, it doesn't work. You have to meet all these three vectors. Once renewables get to that point, by all means, we'll switch off and move on to a different future. Until then, it's a little bit more complex than just saying, forget about hydrocarbons for now, because it's not going to happen, at least for another decade. Thank you.
What do you say? Well, especially about gas, because I mean, gas is less environmentally problematic than oil and coal.
No, I think it's a fair thing. It was, I'm an entrepreneur, not a politician, and so I allow myself to say things that might cause
a reaction. But no, I don't believe we'll be off hydrocarbons in 10 years, or probably not in 20, and probably not even at net zero. But that doesn't mean the renewables agenda doesn't need forcing as fast as it can be. And I think interestingly, there's a huge interplay between the oil and gas industry and the renewables industry in effectively what's happening with hydrogen. And I think a lot of these gas networks that are being built are potential hydrogen carriers. And there is an opportunity across the Mediterranean to be carrying hydrogen from North Africa. We're seeing it in the North Sea already. A lot of the older oil fields in the North Sea are being repurposed as hydrogen carriers. And I think to the extent to which that integration and thought can take place, there's a big opportunity to use a lot of the infrastructure that's there to move towards to the cleaner fuels.
Can I make a comment on hydrogen? Question. Green hydrogen at 8 euros a kilo, that's the cost that we estimate today, versus clean, let's call it blue hydrogen, with storage of CO2 back in the ground at 2 euro a kilo. How do you deal with that? How can you convince people to increase the cost? Because I agree with you 100%. Hydrogen is the way forward. We see the future in the same way. But how do you make it affordable for the average consumer and the industry? Because that's the big challenge. We all love green hydrogen, but how do you make it competitive? Because if you tell the industry that they need to quadruple their cost of energy, somebody needs to pay for that again. So let's not talk about theory, let's talk about actual cost. Who's going to pay for it? Until we can get the cost down to what I said before, affordability is a key word in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we're focused mainly on ammonia for the time being because, ammonia, you can produce green ammonia at 600, 650 a tonne, and, the grey ammonia market's at 1,200 a tonne. So today, just making ammonia green is a key priority because it's doable today. I think, hydrogen is a much, much more difficult question because it's so much harder to move, and the users aren't there yet. And so when we look at green hydrogen, for example, in Spain, we believe that the diesel equivalent price, and this is taking out the capex for a lorry, is around 9 euros, and therefore you can make it at we think we can make green hydrogen locally in Spain without having to move it very far for about 7 or 8 euros. If blue hydrogen's produced at 2, then who knows? And where is that? And if that's just in Texas, then that's an answer for Texas. It may not be an answer for elsewhere.
Yeah, coming back to Greece, sorry, okay, I'll get to it in 1 second. Just to close on hydrogen. In Greece, we are investing at the moment in the production of what we call clean hydrogen, which is 99.6% clean from gas, with reinjection of the CO2 back into the Prinos field that is going to become the CCS area of Greece at those levels of cost, to be used by the fertilizer, which is next to us, by a power station, which is also close to us. So, yes, you cannot move it across the globe, but there are solutions that we are implementing today in country that will provide solutions for hydrogen as well. Sorry.
Should we just take a couple of questions from the audience? One in the front there. Those three, perhaps.
Thank you.
We haven't got much time.
Well, I'll be very brief. I have a question to Giles. So I applaud all the initiatives that you're doing. I think it's fantastic. In my mind, and I will not give a speech, but in my mind you have three parts to this equation, as Mathios indicated. You have the affordability element, you have the sustainability element, and we then have the security of supply and energy security element. I think we're all agreeing that the affordability element has been fantastic, because that's why we have been developing globally the way we have in the last 100 years. And we would not have done that had it not been for Mathios hydrocarbons. But we, of course, realize now that actually this comes at an incredibly high price, sustainability-wise. So you said it, we need to bring these pieces together. There actually needs to be a transition. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But you also said, forget about hydrocarbons. That terrifies me. Because I hear this very often.
Well, luckily I'm not in charge of them.
No, that's fine. But it's a fantastic slogan. And it's also a very deceiving slogan, because I think that a lot of people have actually taken you literally. And that is what we have done. And this is why we are now facing a situation where, for example, we are not transitioning into gas and continuing, but we see very often now a reversal into coal, because we just don't have the capacity. So as somebody who's driving this agenda, what do you think are the primary policy impediments that we need to resolve for the transition?
Let's just pass the microphone and we'll to the lady behind you.
Yeah, it's a very similar question. I was thinking that given the fact that practically the average Greek is not going to drive a Tesla tomorrow, and also the whole virtue signaling about green projects in the investment community and investors moving away from supporting oil and gas industry, practically, what could the Greek government do in order to support the net zero of oil and gas firms without penalizing them financially and them getting distracted from doing what they're meant to do, which is affordable energy for everyone? Thank you.
And there's one behind.
John Faraklis from All About Shipping. I hear about cars and all this, jazz, but I come from the biggest industry in the world, which is the shipping industry. And we are proud that we only pollute 2.7 centum of this planet. I wonder why you're all afraid. You talk about renewable energy, you don't talk about the alternative source of energy, where in our view, one thing will happen if all of us use and respect the environment, big money will change hands. So I'd like Mr. Rigas to respond on this. We have in shipping the alternative sources, wind power, we reduce everything, we nearly zero it. Cars, it's for us minimal in comparison of what the ships they use to ply the ocean, because the supply chain is based on the intermodal chain of ships, containers and so forth. So why don't you go for the alternative sources? Thank you.
And then finally, was there a question over there? No, fine. Okay, no, let's take those three. Oh, sorry, one more over there. No? Yes, sorry.
I think this is a very heated debate. Just to throw one more question into this, we're talking about potential explorations for new fossil fuels. These are investments that require large amounts of money and are investments that are going to last for 20 to 30 years at minimum. And it's 2022. We talk about net zero by 2050. We talk about it being a regulatory requirement on the EU level to be net zero by 2050. So how do these realities align? Completely hear the security component, but is there not a way of looking at using existing fossil fuels to make sure we can fuel the industries that cannot be powered by renewable energy, and then shift those large investments that would go into new explorations instead into renewable energy?
Any comments?
All right, good.
Briefly.
Briefly, yeah. Let's start with
Transition.
transition. I think it's for you, what Richard mentioned. The question about what governments can do. I will talk about what governments are actually doing. And the government today is passing legislation to allow carbon storage in the country. Is supporting through the Recovery and Resilience Fund the use of, or the alternative use of existing infrastructure like the old Prinos field and converting it into the first carbon storage project in Greece, which will actually allow the industries to continue operating, which is a huge problem. Greece emits about 11 million tons of CO2 per year, industrial CO2. So you cannot ask a cement factory, you can, of course, you can take a view that I don't want cement to be produced in Greece, I will import it. I don't want products to be produced from refineries, I will import it. But as long as we have these big industries, the solution is to help them decarbonize and or reduce their carbon emissions and bring them to, and the government is taking action. Now, with respect to the question about the shipping, you said, why isn't shipping using alternative fuels, if I understood you correctly?
We were using the wind power, for example, and must now. And
Okay.
we're trying to go for anything alternative.
Fantastic. I mean, you know, if any industry can decarbonize, I will be the first supporter, even if that's bad for our business.
You mentioned about saving the planet, earlier on.
Okay, if we can see ships flying with, going with sails or other sources, by all means, that's great for everyone. And on the last point about how does the two goals of getting to net zero and using fossil fuels work together, well, unfortunately, they don't. And that's what I said, it's a reality check. So we can talk about things, but we have the reality in front of us. And the reality is that, as I said before, this world still, for the next decades to come, will be using fossil fuels. At least that's my view. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe, next year some technological advancement has happened and we moved away. But as long as we continue this lifestyle, and I'll come back to the point about people not driving Teslas, because you're absolutely correct. People are expecting that the average Greek or Cypriot will spend 30,000, 40,000 euro and buy an electric car. Well, it's not going to happen. It's not. No matter how big the subsidies are from governments, no matter how big the incentives are, it's not that simple. So, coming back to my previous question, are we going to produce or import our energy? That's the key question. And then, once we are secure, we can start to get to the greener future. I bring back the example of Israel. They first secured the country. They first got to the point where they have enough for the next 50 years. Then they start to move to the greener future. So the transition has to happen in an organized fashion. Otherwise, we end up in situations like the one we face today.
Transition with some fossil fuel.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to quote the lady up there, it's the whole debate about, if everybody panics and says, in the UK, the fracking lobby has started up again. There's all sorts of projects being, squeaked through in the US. I think it's a question of, we can't overreact and let there be an excuse for doing things which we shouldn't otherwise logically be doing. Of course it may, the example given here of if you can produce gas in Cyprus rather than exporting it and re-importing it, there's a lower carbon footprint to that, so we should be doing it. It's just a question of finding the logic. Quickly on the electric cars, absolutely, we're all going to be driving them because there won't be 30,000. You can already buy one in China for 9,000, and those cars will gradually come in, and I think people will transition to electric cars. I forgot the other questions.
No, I think that probably covers it actually. And anyway, we've run out of time. We could even raise the subject of nuclear, but I think that would be another panel.
It's a bad topic.
So thank you very much to both of you for an interesting discussion.